Let's talk about one of the coolest what-ifs in sports history. Michael Jordan, the GOAT of basketball. 6 rings, 5 MVPs, a flu game that turned into basketball folklore. But what about baseball? In 1994, the greatest basketball player alive decided to take a complete left turn and step away at the peak of his career and take on a new challenge: professional baseball. And depending on who you ask, you might hear that he was better than expected. You might hear that his decision was a huge mistake and a waste of time. But today, we're actually going to answer the question: was MJ actually any good at baseball? Did he really have a shot at making the majors? Or was this just a sports experiment gone wrong? Let's break it down. So why did Michael Jordan, in the middle of being the Michael Jordan, at the pinnacle of his career, decide to drop basketball and try a career change to baseball? A big part of it was his dad. James Jordan was a huge baseball fan, and he always imagined his son playing in the major leagues. When he was tragically killed in 1993, MJ was devastated. Baseball was something they had talked about for years, so in a way, playing the sport was his way of honoring his father. Then there was the burnout. Jordan had just led the Bulls to 3 straight championships, but off the court, things were getting exhausting. The nonstop media pressure, the gambling rumors, the weight of being the guy every single night, it was all wearing him down. Basketball wasn't fun the way it used to be. And in reality, Jordan was never going to sit still. If he was going to step away from the NBA, he wasn't going to just chill at home and play golf all day, though he definitely played a lot of golf. He needed something new to conquer, and baseball gave him that. Of course, picking up a bat is one thing. Actually being good at baseball, that's a different story. Now, let's take a look at the numbers, because that's what most people point to when they say Michael Jordan was not good at baseball. And yeah, at first glance, the stats don't look great. In 1994, playing for the Birmingham Barons, the AA affiliate of the White Sox, MJ put up a .202 batting average, 3 home runs, 51 RBIs, 30 stolen bases, and 114 strikeouts in 127 games. If you know baseball, you know that hitting just above 200 is decently below average. And the strikeout numbers also though. But here's where the context matters. Jordan wasn't just playing at any minor league level. He was in AA, which is where MLB teams stash some of their best young prospects. Most guys at this level have been playing baseball year-round since they were kids, and many of them actually do make it to the majors. Meanwhile, Jordan hadn't played competitive baseball since high school. Yet he was able to put the ball in play, drive in runs, and swipe 30 bases. That last number actually stands out. Stealing 30 bases in a season isn't easy, and it proves that even at 31 years old, his athleticism translated. And then there's the 51 walks. That's a small but important detail. It shows that he wasn't just flailing at pitches. He had the patience to work counts, which is something even experienced hitters struggle with. A lot of scouts actually noted that his eye to the plate was better than expected for someone who hadn't played in so long. And let's not ignore the fact that baseball is a sport where even the best players fail most of the time. In MLB, a 300 batting average is pretty solid, and that means you're still failing 7 out of 10 times. So while a 202 average isn't ideal, considering the circumstances, it's not nearly as bad as people make it seem. Also, former MLB manager Terry Francona, who coached Jordan that season, has said multiple times that if MJ had stuck with baseball for a few more years, he genuinely believed it was possible he could have made it into the majors. And Francona isn't the type to throw out empty praise. So when people look at the stats and write off MJ's baseball career as a failure, they're missing the bigger picture. He wasn't an all-star, sure, but for a guy who walked away from baseball and stepped right into one of the toughest levels of pro baseball, he actually held his own better than most people realize. We've looked at the stats. Some were rough, some were actually kinda solid. But let's go deeper. What did MJ actually do well on the baseball field? And where did he struggle the most? First off, his athleticism was off the charts, which, obviously, it's Michael Jordan. Even at 31, he was one of the fastest guys on the field. That 30 stolen bases stat, that wasn't luck. He had a great first step, knew how to read pitches, and once he got moving, that NBA explosiveness kicked in. And then there's his work ethic. Everybody who was around him at the time says the same thing. This guy worked harder than anyone. First to the stadium, last to leave, always taking extra batting practice, and relentlessly working on his fielding. Another thing that gets overlooked, his patience at the plate. We already mentioned his 51 walks, which shows much more of his understanding of the game, viable pitch recognition, and plate discipline. And when he did make contact, he put the ball in play. He wasn't hitting bombs, but was making contact. And in baseball, that's half the battle. Now for the tough part. Breaking balls absolutely destroyed him. Fastballs, he could handle those. But as soon as pitchers started throwing sliders and curveballs, it was game over. That's why he struck out 114 times in 127 games. Although he was able to draw a walk, he just didn't have the experience to recognize those pitches often enough and adjust in time. And even though he had the build of a power hitter, he wasn't actually hitting for power. He had only 3 home runs all season. Although, that's probably 3 more than anyone expected. His swing mechanics just weren't there, and he wasn't making solid contact often enough to drive the ball. Defensively, he had the speed to cover the ground, but his instincts weren't great. Sometimes he misread fly balls or take weird routes to them. Again, that's something that takes years to develop, and he just didn't have that. And finally, consistency was a huge issue. Some games he looked solid, working counts, getting on base. Other games he looked totally lost at the plate. And in baseball, consistency is everything. So, the big question, could Michael Jordan have actually made it to the major leagues? Like, if he had stuck with baseball, would we have seen him in a White Sox uniform, stepping up to the plate at Comiskey Park? Terry Francona, his manager in the minors, seemed to think so. He straight up said that if MJ had gotten another 1,500 at-bats, basically another 2 or 3 seasons, he could have made it to the big leagues. And that's not just some empty encouragement. Francona is a respected baseball mind, a guy who later managed multiple MLB teams and won a World Series title. He knows talent when he sees it. And it's not like Jordan was completely hopeless. He had tools, he was fast, he was coachable, he was obsessed with improving. His work ethic alone made people believe in him. But there's also the reality that baseball isn't just about athleticism or work ethic. It's about instincts, muscle memory, years and years of refining your swing, reading pitches, knowing when to sit on a fastball, and when to expect a breaking ball. MJ had the athleticism and the mindset, but he was still light years behind guys who had been playing non-stop since they were kids. And there's another thing. He was already 31 when he started. That's old for a baseball prospect. Most guys reach the majors in their early 20s. Even the best major leaguers spend years grinding just to get a shot. Jordan didn't have that kind of time. If he had started even 5 years earlier, maybe. But at 31, he was fighting an uphill battle. His numbers weren't great. Yes, there was progress. Yes, he improved. But was it MLB level improvement? That's where things get iffy. If he had kept going, maybe he could have cracked a major league roster as a pinch runner or a utility outfielder. But a full-time MLB player? A starter? Highly unlikely. At the end of the day, Jordan just wasn't in baseball long enough for us to get a real answer. He gave it a shot. He made more progress than most people expected. But he was still a long way from being a legit major league player. And then the Bulls came calling. And well, we all know how that turned out. So after all that, where do we land on MJ's baseball career? Was it a complete disaster, or did he actually accomplish something? Honestly, it depends on how you look at it. If you're expecting him to have dominated baseball the way he did basketball, yeah, that was never going to happen. He wasn't about to waltz into MLB and start smacking home runs like Barry Bonds. But if you measure it based on what was realistic, it's actually impressive. He hadn't played since high school. He was 31, competing against guys who had been playing every day for over a decade, and he still managed to hold his own at AA, which is no joke. The fact that he hit over 200, stole 30 bases, and showed real improvement, that's something. Plenty of guys devote their whole lives to the game and never even make it that far. It would be interesting to see a world where Jordan dedicated his life to baseball instead of basketball though. More than anything, Jordan's baseball career wasn't about stats or making it to the big leagues. It was about proving something to himself, to his late father, and to anyone who doubted him. He stepped out of his comfort zone and took on one of the hardest challenges in sports. And even though he didn't become an MLB star, he didn't embarrass himself either. So, did he strike out? No. Did he hit a home run? Not exactly. But if we're sticking with baseball metaphors, maybe he legged out an infield single. It wasn't legendary, but it was respectable. For a guy who had already conquered one sport, that's pretty remarkable.